The great physician had looked oddly, very oddly, at Claire more than once. He seemed to be watching her. She was uneasy under his scrutiny. She made little twitching motions with her hands. She was nervous, horribly nervous, and was it? Could it be? Frightened. Why was she frightened? With a jerk, he came back to the conversation round the table. Mrs. Eversley had got the great man talking upon his own subject. My dear lady, he was saying, what is madness? I can assure you that the more we study the subject, the more difficult we find it to pronounce. We all practice a certain amount of self deception, and when we carry it so far as to believe we are the Tsar of Russia, we are shut up or restrained. But there is a long road before we reach that point. At what particular spot on it shall we erect a post and say, on this side sanity, on the other madness? It can't be done, and I will tell you this. If the man suffering from a delusion happened to hold his tongue about it, in all probability, we should never be able to distinguish him from a normal individual. The extraordinary sanity of the insane is a most interesting subject. Sir Allington sipped his wine with appreciation and beamed upon the company. I've always heard they are very cunning, remarked Mrs. Eversley. Loonies, I mean. Remarkably so, and suppression of one's particular delusion has a disastrous effect very often. All suppressions are dangerous, as psychoanalysis has taught us. The man who has a harmless eccentricity and can indulge it as such seldom goes over the borderline. But the man, he paused, or woman, who is to all appearance perfectly normal, may be in reality a poignant source of danger to the community. His gaze travelled gently down the table to Claire and then back again. He sipped his wine once more. A horrible fear shook Dumont. Was that what he meant? Was that what he was driving at? Impossible, but and all from suppressing oneself, sighed Mrs. Eversley. I quite see that one should be very careful always to express one's personality. The dangers of the other are frightful. My dear Mrs. Eversley, ex- expostulated the physician, you have quite misunderstood me. The cause of the mischief is in the physical matter of the brain, sometimes arising from some outward agency, such as a blow, sometimes, alas, congenital. Heredity is so sad, sighed the lady vaguely. Consumption and all that. Tuberculosis is not hereditary, said Sir Arlington dryly. Isn't it? I always thought it was. But madness is. How dreadful. What else? Gout, said Sir Arlington, smiling, and colour blindness. The latter is rather interesting. It is transmitted direct to males, but is latent in females. So while there are many color-blind men, For a woman to be colorblind, it must have been latent in her mother as well as present in her father, rather an unusual state of things to occur. That is what is called sex-limited heredity. How interesting, but madness is not like that, is it? Madness can be handed down to men or women equally, said the physician gravely. Claire rose suddenly, pushing back her chair so abruptly that it overturned and fell to the ground. She was very pale, and the nervous motions of her fingers were very apparent. You will not be long, will you? She begged. Mrs. Thompson will be here in a few minutes now. One glass of port, and I will be with you for one, declared Sir Arlington. To see this wonderful Mrs. Thompson's performance is what I have come for, is it not? Ha ha. Not that I needed any inducement. He bowed. Claire gave a faint smile of acknowledgement and passed out of the room, her hand on Mrs. Eversley's shoulder. Afraid I've been talking sharp, remarked the physician as he resumed his seat. Forgive me, my dear fellow. Not at all, said Trent perfunctorily. He looked strained and worried. For the first time, Dermont felt an outsider in the company of his friend. Between these two was a secret that even an old friend might not share. And yet the whole thing was fantastic and incredible. What had he to go upon? Nothing but a couple of glances and a woman's nervousness. They lingered over their wine but a very short time and arrived up in the drawing room just as Mrs. Thompson was announced. The medium was a plump, middle-aged woman, atrociously dressed in magenta velvet, with a loud, rather common voice. Hope I'm not late, Mrs. Trent, she said cheerily. You did say 9 o'clock, didn't you? You're quite punctual, Mrs. Thompson, said Claire in her sweet, slight, husky voice. This is our little circle. No further introductions were made, as was evidently the custom. The medium swept them all with a shrewd, penetrating eye. I hope we shall get some good results, she remarked briskly. I can't tell you how I hate it when I go out and I can't give satisfaction, so to speak. It just makes me mad. But I think Shiromako, my Japanese control, will be able to get through all right tonight. I'm feeling ever so fit, and I refused the Welsh rabbit, fond of toasted cheese though I am. Dumont listened, half amused, half disgusted. How prosaic the whole thing was, and yet was he not judging foolishly? Everything, after all, was natural. The powers claimed by mediums were natural powers as yet imperfectly understood. I'm sorry, it's kind of late, and I'm so engrossed in the story that I just. A great surgeon might be wary of indigestion on the eve of a delicate operation. Why not Mrs. Thompson? Chairs were arranged in a circle, light so that they could conveniently be raised or lowered. Dumont noticed that there was no question of Tess or of Sir Arlington satisfying himself as to the conditions of the séance. No, this business of Mrs. Thompson was only a blind. Sir Arlington was here for quite another purpose. Claire's mother, Dumont remembered, had died abroad. There had been some mystery about her, hereditary. With a jerk, he forced his mind back to the surroundings of the moment. Everyone took their places and the lights were turned out, all but a small red shaded one on a far table. For a while, nothing was heard but the low, even breathing of the medium. Gradually, it grew more and more stertorous. Then, with a suddenness that made Demont jump, a loud rap came from the far end of the room. It was repeated from the other side. Then a perfect crescendo of raps were heard. They died away, and a sudden high peal of mocking laughter rang through the room. Then silence broken by a voice utterly unlike that of Mrs. Thompson, a high-pitched, quaintly inflected voice. Oh my God. I am here, gentlemen, it said. Yes, I am here. I have picked the wrong story. I don't want to read this. You wish to ask me things? Who are you, Shiromako? Yes, I, Shiromako. I pass over long time ago. I work. I very happy. Further details of Shiromako's life followed. It was all very flat and uninteresting, and Demont had heard it often before. Everyone was happy, very happy. Messages were given from vaguely described relatives, the description being so loosely worded as to fit almost any contingency. An elderly lady, the mother of someone present, held the floor for some time, imparting copybook maxims with an air of refreshing novelty hardly borne out by her subject matter. Someone else want to get through now, announced Shiromako. Got a very important message for one of the gentlemen. There was a pause, and then a new voice spoke, prefacing its remarks with an evil, demoniacal chuckle. Ha ha ha! Ha ha ha! Better not go home, better not go home. Take my advice. Who are you speaking to? Asked Trent. One of you three. I shouldn't go home if I were him. Danger, blood, not very much blood, quite enough. No, don't go home. The voice grew fainter. Don't go home. It died away completely. Demont felt his blood tingling. He was convinced that the warning was meant for him. Somehow or other, there was danger abroad tonight. There was a sigh from the medium and then a groan. She was coming round. The lights were turned on, and presently she sat upright, her eyes blinking a little. Go off well, my dear. I hope so. Very good indeed. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. Shiromako, I suppose. Yes, and others. Mrs. Thompson yawned. I'm dead beat, absolutely down and out. Does fairly take it out of you. Well, I'm glad it was a success. I was a bit afraid it mightn't be, afraid something disagreeable might happen. There's a queer feel about this room tonight. Oh my God, but this could have been like overheard or transmitted, to Mrs. Thompson or to this man or to this voice.